patients, with their representatives, with staff, with medics, or with any stakeholders. Staff and stakeholders were treated with absolute contempt, and the HSE sent an official to simply announce this decision and give no details whatsoever of that decision. This obviously is deeply traumatic for patients and for staff, and is completely unacceptable. And I believe, Minister, if you'd listen, that you should instruct the HSE to, in future and immediately, to consult with stakeholders prior to decisions being made, and to introduce legislation which would give stakeholders an entitlement to be consulted prior to any decisions being made. The conduct of the HSE in South Tipperary over the last week is absolutely appalling. It shows absolute contempt for all stakeholders, including staff, and that must stop. Thank you.
Deputy.
Thank you, Lascan Corda. Lascan Corda, I don't support this motion, and indeed I don't support the government amendment either. This motion by Fianna Fáil is a total contradiction in my mind. Calling on the government to reduce the cost of health provision in the state, and also calling on the government to reduce the cost of private health insurance premiums. There are many reasons why the premiums have been increasing, mainly because of the fact that 70,000 people have given up their insurance in the last year due to the effect of the recession and the fact that they can no longer afford them, leading to a cycle of increased premiums. But also part of the reason that the health insurance premiums have been increasing has been a welcome move to reduce the subsidy that the health service has been giving to health insurance companies. Making private health insurance pay for the actual cost of the health care that many people who have insurance cover get from the state is the right thing to do. Fianna Fáil want the cost of insurance reduced and the cost of health care reduced as well. Is a reduction in wages of the healthcare workers included in the Croke Park extension the way that they want to see it achieved? Because I don't see any other proposals here. But then we see the government amendment slapping itself on the back about the changes they are bringing to the health services. We will hear this rubbish again about how universal health insurance will solve all the problems in the health services. It is also interesting to note that the Labour Party have dropped all their talk of universal health care, which is completely different to insurance. But then Labour have been captured by Fine Gael and will go along with the universal health insurance model. What the government plans to do is hand the health services over to the private sector and give control to the insurance companies. A system that has seen the cost of health insurance in Holland, that the government say is the way to go, triple since the introduction of universal health insurance. Where Holland is the only country in Europe now where hospitals are going bankrupt because universal health insurance has made sure that the money for healthcare goes to fewer and fewer hospitals. The government plans
to remove the debate we adjourned.
The government plans will make sure that the health insurance companies will have all the games themselves. They will dictate the price in the future, and this Dáil will not be able to do anything about it. There is almost €2 billion paid in health insurance premiums in this state. If that money was raised in taxation on those who can pay it and put into a health service, there would be no need for private health insurance at all. I move the amendment.
Deputy Richard Boyd-Barrett was in possession on the Finance Local Property Tax Amendment Bill 2013, so I ask Deputy Barrett resume.
Thanks, Lascan Corda. Minister, I was asking you prior to the adjournment to maybe answer us at some point this evening a question that your government has failed to answer, despite this issue being debated across the country and to some extent, although severely curtailed, in this House. And the question is very simply, how do people who are in mortgage distress, unable to pay their mortgages, how are they supposed to pay this charge? They simply cannot do it. And you have not answered that question. And we hear the government talking about their desire to see people stay in their family homes. But yet, if you force people to pay this when they can't already pay their distressed mortgages, isn't the reality that more people will be forced into arrears, default, and with the IMF breathing down your neck, demanding that banks have the right to repossess homes, that this is a recipe for more people to lose their family homes? How is someone who has no job, the 430,000 people in this country who have no job, who are surviving on €188 per week, or someone surviving on the state pension, who's surviving on about the same level of income, or even someone who has maybe an additional modest occupational income? How are they supposed to pay this? It is a surefire recipe to drive people who are already living on the breadline into poverty, into an unsustainable situation. And, Minister, you know, I know it's coming up to Easter, the time of miracles, if you believe in all that kind of thing. But seriously, unless you're proposing the economic equivalent of the miracle of the loaves and the fishes for the whole country, how are people supposed to manage this? They simply cannot. And the idea that deferral of payments is somehow an acceptable concession on your part to dealing with this problem is preposterous. Because what you're offering to people then is years and years and years of being in an appalling situation of trying to pay back mortgages they can't manage, and that maybe, if they can get out of this situation, that they will be faced with a massive debt at the end of it. Is that really what you're offering to people? And an important point which I raised today, and I would like an answer if possible on this, Minister, as well, is, you know, our more general point has been that the alternative to this is a real wealth tax levied against those with real wealth in our society. The multimillionaires, the billionaires, the people with very, very high earnings in excess of €100,000, the many tens of thousands of people who are on those high incomes, or increased taxes on the super profitable corporations in this country, who you seem to view as sacrosanct. Whatever other sector of our society has to be battered with cuts and taxes and charges, you refuse to even discuss the possibility of increasing an extra bit of tax on this super profitable corporate sector. But setting aside that, and you've never really answered that question except meaningless drivel about not putting tax on jobs, which I really fail to understand when your taxes have helped sustain a level of mass unemployment, chronic unemployment. But as if to add insult to injury, as I pointed out this afternoon, this is not even an equitable tax within its own terms on homes, which you say it is, or what you call a sort of property asset, when we discover that in the definitions of liable residential property in the bill that was rammed through with a guillotine before Christmas, gardens and adjacent areas around a house will be, their value will be liable to be calculated for working out the amount of property tax people have to pay. But if it goes over 1 acre, that property, that gardens or estates that may surround the houses of wealthier people with bigger houses, with mansions or whatever, will not be calculated. So the mansions and the super wealthy get protected. I mean, how can you justify that? Somebody with a small little bit of a garden or a backyard will have every single inch of their property will be liable. The value of that will be taken into account when you calculate the tax that you intend to impose on them. But if somebody has, as many very wealthy people have, with their very large houses, very large gardens, sprawling estates, that will not be liable.
Really sorry, no, this is a definition section.
Yeah.
Section 1.
Yeah, and I'm pointing out that it is not what the government claimed it was, a property tax. Because a very considerable amount of property of the very wealthy in our society is not going to be taken into account. It's just a tax on the family home. And why don't you just call it that? Which is going to penalise people in a really brutal and cruel way. I mean, we'll discuss the details as we move through in the short time that's available. But the fact of the matter is you've never answered the substantial issues that have been put to you on the injustice of this tax. And I wonder, will you now, or is this the reason why you've curtailed this debate in the undemocratic way that you have?
Come out, Deputy Joan Collins.
I won't take too long because a lot of points have been made already. But I do want to put in the record my objection to it being called a local property tax. It's neither local or is it property. A number of years ago, I believe, the Labour government coalition brought in a tax on houses over a certain amount of money, over a certain value, and the wealthy literally had a strike in relation to it, and it was done away with the actual house tax or property tax at that time. And this is not about extending or broadening the tax base. There's been a few meetings around the country, Minister. I'm sure you may know, you've seen posters around the country calling for meetings of the campaign against the home tax and water tax. And at those meetings, they've been quite small to date, some of them very big, some of them strong, and very angry. And what people see this as is a draconian tax. They see it as that we're now, and they feel they're living in an economic dictatorship, where a government is just ramming down these taxes onto ordinary people's homes in relation to that. It's a home tax. This is where people live. It's not an asset. And I think the main point in relation to this, and you made the point, Minister, before the break, that you were trying to deal with maybe some of these issues, that you listened to us the last time. And I certainly do think he listened to us, because I think he realised, particularly with the local authority housing, that many of the local authorities hadn't budgeted for this year anyway, for 2013, in relation to bringing in the home tax. And really they needed this year to change their budgets for next year, and then increase the rents, obviously, on people in the local authorities. And these are not assets. These people are renting their homes. They're not even thinking about buying their homes. And I think that just expose the lie in relation to that. And just make a point, Minister, that you may not know neither, is that on the 5th of March, the fourth person in Dublin City Council local authority housing are going to be paying an extra €19 per week on their rent as well. So this is going on. The local authorities are looking at how they actually can increase the rent on local authority tenants. All the discussions I've had in relation to maintenance of the mould problems in people's homes and local authority homes, and that this is coming out that the local authority are saying, oh, look at the amount of money that the private landlords are getting, and look at the price or the rent that our tenants are paying, and we'll have to look at maybe increasing it and all that sort of stuff. But that's coming in on the 5th of March, €19 per week on the fourth tenant in the home, and then you're also looking at people looking a deferment of the local authority, local authorities having to pay the home tax it's next year. I think, just maybe finishing on this point, as I said, a lot of points have been made, I'm not going to repeat them, that this is going to be the rock that the government perishes on, from the point of view, even in the long term. People will be very, very angry. The campaign against the home and water taxes will be calling meetings as the letters drop into people's homes at the 11th of March. And I can see, and I do believe there's going to be a big response to that from the point of view of the tenants, those public meetings, and discussing out how people see a way to change the situation. Don't take much, just maybe finishing one point, what Fianna Fáil are saying is the wrong tax at the wrong time. I believe if they were in government now, they'd be saying it's the right tax at the right time. So I don't take too much notice of that.
Deputy Stephen Donnelly.
Thanks, Gaelic. Minister, I'd just like to make three quick points. The first is on the process. I won't go over it again. We've got 3 days with you in the Finance Committee, from morning till night on the finance bill, and we all know that if the government wanted to give this substantive time in front of the Finance Committee, not just for the opposition members of the Finance Committee, but for the many excellent government members of the Finance Committee, this is critical legislation. It could have been done. We all know it could have been done. And to my mind, this is stifling parliamentary debate. Now, all I'd say on this is, be careful, because the more the Cabinet treats the People's Parliament with contempt, the more the people treat us with contempt. And as I'm sure you're aware, the latest European trust barometers show that the Irish people have the second lowest trust in Europe in their politicians. So I would just ask you to be careful when you do things like this, because ultimately it hurts the Parliament and hurts the country. The second is a quick definitional point, Minister. The Taoiseach incorrectly today in Leaders' Questions stated that gardens are not taxed, they're not part of the valuation. Now, of course, we know they are, up to an acre, which I think was the point that was being made. So if you could correct that, I'd hate the government TDs to be voting for something tonight that they have incorrect information on. And the third point, Minister, is on the bill itself. As I've said to you before, I don't have a problem with a local service charge. I'd have no problem paying a local service charge, as long as it went fully to local services and as long as it accounted for the net value of the house, for stamp duty paid, for ability to pay, and for regional variations of the price. Now, I took a look at average house prices for 3-bed semi-Ds around the country. And Minister, people in your constituency will pay 2.6 times less than people in my hometown. Now, one could argue, well, that's because they're living in more expensive houses. Well, they are living in more expensive houses, but they're not living in bigger houses. And public sector wages, public sector employees, for example, are paid exactly the same amount. So I'll just give you a quick example. I was knocking on doors recently in Greystones, and a Garda came to the door about 7 o'clock at night. And he was very angry. He said, "Come in here." And he pointed to a cheese toastie on his table. And he said, "That's all I've got left. I don't have money left with all the various cuts to overtime, cuts to pay, etc. I can't afford to pay myself, to buy myself a proper dinner." And as you can imagine, he was very angry. Now, this property tax will probably hit him with a bill of about €500. And he doesn't have it. And he's not paid any more than anyone in your constituency. And interestingly, in the Taoiseach's constituency, they'll also pay 2.6 times less than people in my hometown. These are the same public sector workers, pay the same wage with the same issues. So what I would like to ask you as part of committee stage, because obviously we're not going to get to all of the amendments, but what I would like to ask you is why? If you could explain to the Finance Committee and the other members here, why? This to me is bad policy. I don't understand why regional variation isn't included. I don't understand why ability to pay isn't included, for all of the reasons we've gone over before. So I really would appreciate you explaining to the committee and to the other deputies, why are you going to force through legislation tonight that doesn't account for things that members of your own party have described as being so unfair as to potentially cause a revolution in this country? That was from a very sensible TD. So my question to you on the various amendments, there's technically competent amendments in here. This amendment booklet is not grandstanding. I've looked through it. And the amendments from the technical group, from Sinn Féin, from Fianna Fáil, these are technical, sensible amendments. So my question to you is why you are pushing something through that seems to fail a test of fairness and ability to pay on so many fronts. So that's my main question to you tonight, Minister. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Michael Healy-Rae.
Thank you very much, Mr. Caller. Could I just say to the Minister that I too have serious reservations about this property tax, because one of the issues that I was highlighting out, Minister, very early on in the time, was if you take a farmhouse that is being asked to put a value on itself, that farmhouse could be located in the centre of the family farm, located alongside sheds. How can you realistically put a value on that property? Because while that house is a home to the family that are living in it, who else would want to purchase a house in the middle of a working farm? So to me, that house is actually worthless on the open market, because who would want to be listening to cows roaring in the middle of the night unless you own them yourself? And it is bad enough to have to go out to them when you own them yourself, but you don't want to be listening to somebody else's cows. And all of the farmyard activity that would go on in a yard, that would ensure that those houses would not actually be sellable items on the open market. So they actually have no value because nobody would want them. So those people shouldn't actually be paying any tax. But that hasn't been highlighted. The reason why the pyrite people, and I'm very, very delighted, and I know people behind me and people that are unfortunately not here, put up a great battle on the pyrite issue, and I'm delighted they won their battle. But what about the people's houses who are suffering from radon? Why is there no exception for them? I will tell you why. Because there was plenty of TDs here representing large amounts of people, and they got a weight going behind them, and I'm delighted they did, and I really compliment every one of them, and they all know who they are. But why did we not get a weight going behind us on the radon issue? I will tell you why. Because to have radon in your house, predominantly, it means they're out in the places in the countryside where there's limestone rock and naturally occurring features that mean the houses finish up being poisoned with this gas. People have died in these homes, and we're still going to charge them a property tax. It makes no sense. If the pyrite, yes, but this point has to be made, Minister, and you're a reasonable and fair man. And I know that the point I'm making is sound and it's solid. But the reason why those houses are not being exempted here tonight is because they're not located here in Dublin, or they're not located in Cork, or they're not located in Limerick. That's why they're not being exempted, and it's unfair. If you had a person who had a family member, as I have people, that people belonging to them have died because of their homes, and now they're being asked to pay a property tax. And the only reason they're able to continue living in their homes tonight is because they pay a fee every year to ensure that the radon is kept suppressed. And that is costing, in some cases, between 150 and 350 seems to be the average per year. And we are telling those people tonight they have to pay a tax. It is unfair, Minister. It really and truthfully is. So I just want to thank the last caller for the opportunity, and I want to discuss at other stages. I don't want to take up time on other people.
Deputy Seamus Healy.
Last caller, there's no doubt in my mind but that this so-called local property tax is no such thing. It is simply and solely a family home tax. And I want to remind the Minister that the Taoiseach, Deputy Kenny, in opposition, told us that any attempt to tax the family home was unfair, and I think he said it was immoral as well. And if I'm not mistaken, the Minister himself said something very similar when he was in opposition. This is a family home tax that is going to hit mainly middle and lower income families, people who already, as we know from various, particularly credit union surveys, people who are already hit by austerity, who have little or nothing left at the end of the month after they pay their bills. I think the most recent survey, and one of a number of surveys by the credit union movement, shows that something like 1.8 million families have only €50 left at the end of the month after paying all their bills. This is a family home tax, and the section of the Act which exempts gardens, so-called, over an acre, is an indication that that is the case, that this is not a property tax, this is a family home tax, and it disproportionately is a disproportionate advantage to wealthier people who have estates and big gardens surrounding their large homes, and it's a disadvantage to people who live in your normal semi-detached house. I want to say as well, Lascian Corla, and I think this is important, and I want to ask the Minister, even at this late stage, to agree to lift the guillotine on this legislation. Because I believe that the guillotining of this legislation prevents members of this House carrying out their responsibilities as elected members. And I believe that the question of constitutionality of this bill and of the Primary Act which was passed before Christmas, because of the manner in which it was passed, because of the driving of that legislation through the House by guillotine, by the fact that large numbers of amendments were not taken, and again tonight, large numbers of amendments will not be taken. And that action has deprived not just us here in opposition, but the Minister's own colleagues on the other side of the House, has deprived them of their constitutional right and responsibility to ensure that any legislation that goes through this House is properly perused and properly dissected and properly gone through.
Thank you,
I believe, Lascion Corla, and I want to make that point again, I believe that is a very, very important point which the Minister should take on board and the Government should take on board, and I'm asking him now, I'm asking the Minister now to agree to lift this guillotine because of the very serious consequences that may arise as a result of the guillotine of this bill and indeed of the primary legislation.
Deputy Ryan.
Thank you, Lascia Hurley. Lascia Hurley, the Section 1 of this bill states, in this Act, and in quotations, Principal Act means the Finance Local Property Tax Act 2012 and its definition. Now, we have spent over an hour now debating the title of this bill. And in most of that time, we've listened to opposition deputies lamenting the fact that we don't have time to debate the amendments. Now, I have a certain deal of sympathy with opposition deputies in terms of the time allocated to this committee stage in debate. Now, there are 67 amendments in the time allocated, but I have no sympathy whatsoever for the tactics involved. And they're the same tactics that were employed at the main bill early on, or before Christmas. And the section 1 of the bill, the title of the bill, Section 1 of the bill, the title of the bill, there are actually no amendments in it. In Section 2 of the bill, there are 19 amendments. And in the time available to date, and the time available till this debate closes, there is more than ample time to get through a significant amount of amendments. I accept we couldn't get through all of the amendments. But the people who are affected by pyrite in my constituency in Dublin North will not be sympathetic to the people who are delaying tactics here tonight. It was quite achievable. It's quite achievable. It is quite achievable. It is quite achievable. It is quite achievable for us. I sat here and listened to the stuff that went on before now, and I expect the same courtesy. It was quite achievable for us here tonight to get to a point where we're dealing with Section 3. Now, Section 3 of this bill is what deals with the pyrite exemption. Now, the Minister for Finance on Friday last gave some positive soundings in relation to what he might do tonight in relation to discussing options in terms of dealing with those issues that were raised last week. So the people who are waiting to see the colour of the Minister's money may not very well see it tonight because of the tactics of the opposition here tonight. And I lament that here tonight. Thank you, Lascia Hurley.
Minister to reply to this section.
Thanks very much, Lascion Corla. Deputies are free in the opposition to use the time available as they see fit, as long as you, Count Corla, deem it to be in order. So I have no objection with how people use the time. I'd like to deal with the first suggestion that there is insufficient time to debate the bill because time is being restricted. The local property tax bill, finance bill, went through before Christmas, through the Dáil and through the Shannon, and it was signed by the President. So that piece of legislation is not before the House tonight. What's before the House tonight is an amendment bill of 16 sections, which is quite a short bill, and all of the sections in it are addressing particular difficulties that deputies and others who made representations to me saw with the bill. So this bill is a series of amendments to improve the legislation arising from the debate on second stage and in committee stage before Christmas. And yet, most of the speeches here tonight, and you're entitled to, as I say, use the time or whatever you like, most of them are addressing the bill which passed before Christmas and was signed by the President. There are 16 sections in this bill tonight, and we're at committee stage of the bill, and we haven't addressed one amendment yet. Now, on the allegation that this bill, that there's insufficient time for it, we had the second stage on Friday, and there was quite good contributions on Friday. But I sat here on Friday, took a break for lunch, but I was here for most of the debate. And as it came on to 2:30 and 2:45 and 3 o'clock for the debate that was ending at 3:30, if the government whip hadn't put in government deputies to keep the debate going, the debate would have collapsed. The debate, look at the record. Look at the record. Look at the record. Look at the record. The debate has collapsed. There was no demand.
No,
there was no demand.
Deputy, please, no. Let the minister.
There was no demand.
Minister,
I want 20 minutes. I only want 10.
Deputy, please.
There was no demand. There was no demand. There was no demand at the end of that debate from anybody to speak. Not as, and the government whip was putting in deputies to keep the debate going. So that's the first point I'd like. That's the first point. The second point I'd like to make is that, you know, as a number of opposition deputies have said, the role of Parliament is to scrutinise legislation to make it better. And that's the way you do it at committee stage by way of amendment. We all know that. But as Deputy Éireann has pointed out, we've spent an hour now on second stage speeches again. And there is no scrutiny by the opposition of the detailed amendments, with some honourable exceptions. Deputy Catherine Murphy raised two issues, but both issues she raised are being dealt with in the text of the bill by amendments which arose from the previous debate. A number of other deputies as well. Deputy Dáil raised the pirates issue, and that's being dealt with within the bill. And when we get to that section, we can have a good discussion on it. Deputy Stephen Dáil raised a few issues. But otherwise, we had second stage speeches.
Raise the issue in terms of private homes.
Yeah,
let's be honest.
We made a second stage.
We get to those sections.
We made a second stage. Now, Deputy McGrath, always constructive, raised the issue that he raised before about having a second test for deciding who should pay property tax. Now, the government decided, and the bill is enacted, that it will be paid on the basis of the market value of the family home on the basis of self-assessment. And those that have an inability to pay may defer. And the details are set out of the criteria for the inability to pay. Now, Deputy McGrath wants to bring in another axis, so that you'd have an income axis and a value axis, and where the two cross, well, then there's a liability to pay. But that was decided, and the President signed this into law. And you're going back to the original bill and running something that the government has decided already. Now, you're entitled to do that, but the answer will be the same. The answer will be the same. Deputy Joe Higgins, you know, in a speech which could only be kind of an incitement to break the law, because he encouraged people to break the law and mobilise in their thousands and go out and break the law. No, that's fine, if that's what Deputy Higgins suggests, but I don't think I was elected in here to break the law. I think we're lawmakers, not lawbreakers, and I don't think any deputy in this House should incite the public to break the law. Deputy Pearse Doherty made no such incitement. He presented his protest in a fair and reasonable manner. He's opposed to this bill, absolutely. But you know, suggested that the opposition to it should be illegal and within the law, and that's a fair point of view. He also personalised the payment of the tax by suggesting that myself and the Taoiseach would have no problem. I think he said when the letter would drop in the Taoiseach's mat, he'd have no problem in writing a cheque for it. Well, we can return that in kind. I don't think Deputy Adams will have any problem either for his house in Louth and his house in Donegal, because he doesn't seem to have any problem in paying a much higher property tax for his house in Belfast. So if we want to get personal about it, we can throw brickbats across the house. I admire, on the other hand, Deputy Pearse Doherty quoting Dick Mulcahy. I didn't think you were a student of Dick Mulcahy, but hang out your brightest colours. You know, that would brighten any Fine Gael's heart to hear you quoting that here tonight. Deputy Claire Daly, as I said, brought up an issue which she has pursued. It's in the bill, and we can talk about that. Her suggestions that we could have alternative sources of taxation, either by increasing corporation tax or income tax. We've made the arguments on that before. Either of these taxes are a tax on employment. And, you know, one of the worst problems we're facing are the high levels of unemployment and the high levels of structural unemployment. Deputy Boyd Barrett has, you know, made another second stage speech, and he has gone through all the issues that he went through before, but he really hasn't brought the issue forward. Deputy John Collins acknowledged that we had moved on the local authority houses, and I'll repeat again, all local authority houses now, and all houses who are that are rented by voluntary organisations to tenants analogous to local authority tenants, the maximum they will pay will be on the lower band, the bottom band. In other words, this year they'll pay €45 if they're eligible, and in a full year they'll pay €90, and that's the way it'll remain for the next 3 years. And I know deputies look for that, and you know, well, all right. Deputy Stephen Donnelly talked about the inadequate debate. I think I've dealt with that. He also talked about the Taoiseach saying gardens wouldn't be liable to the tax. Well, a garden in Mayo is different from a garden in Dublin, you know. And when people down the country talk of gardens, they're not necessarily talking about the bit near the house. But what the definition is, in accordance with what applies in capital gains tax and capital acquisitions tax, it's the curtilage of the house up to an acre. Now, I live in a housing estate. The site is less than 1/8 of an acre. People who live, my neighbours out the road, in the country part, they got planning permission in a half acre. Others have up to an acre. So it's not that you're exempt after an acre or before an acre. It's that you're liable if your curtilage is up to an acre, but beyond that it's not considered to be curtilage, and that's in accordance with the capital acquisitions tax and the capital gain. Capital gains tax. Look, I mean, there was one third point. There was one third point that Deputy. The Deputy Donnelly's other objection was that this is not a local property tax. Well, the bulk of the yield is going to be applied to local services, and the differentiation between house values in you know, expensive parts of Dublin and in other parts of the country, of course there's a differential, but there's a differential between houses in many parts of Limerick and Cork and Galway as well, and other parts of the country. But did you ask yourself the question, why are the values of those houses high and why are the values of those other houses low? And I mean, the answer is to do with where the house is and the level of services and amenities enjoyed. And the level of services and amenities is something that is by and large provided by the taxpayer. Obviously, if you're on a loose line, you're better off than if you're down the country and you have to wait for the bus to come, you know, maybe 3 days of the week. In local authority houses, we've dealt with that. Deputy Collins dealt with that. On local authority houses, whether they're in Dublin or down the country, they're going to be on the lower rate. They'll pay €45 this year. They'll pay €90 in a full year, and that will be maintained. Now, the other issue of apart from values being in accordance with local services and services being applied at a local level, the bulk of the yield. The bulk of the yield. Well, there's a big subsidy to CIE, John. The bulk of the yield is going to be spent by the local authorities in whose functional area the tax is gathered. Now, as well as that, from 2015, there'll be discretion vested in the elected members of local authorities to vary the tax up or down. And I would see a situation where there is a high property tax. It will be an election issue when candidates go knocking on doors to bring the tax down, and in other areas to provide services. If the tax is quite low, there'll be pressure to put the tax up a bit to provide extra services. And we're talking about repairing a flaw in our tax system, which goes back to the abolition of rates in 1977. And we must start moving it towards local government, where local government raises the tax and local government spends the tax, and they're accountable locally to the people who elect them. And the move on that is to vest the power in the local authorities to vary the tax by plus or minus 15%. And we'll see how that goes, what subsequent governments will do, but we're building a base so that we have real local government which is funded and can provide services. And I think, I mean, you mightn't agree with it. You mightn't agree with that now. But I think the arguments I'm making are intellectually sound. The arguments I'm making are valid. And we're not pretending to be doing anything other than what we're doing.
Please.
Deputy, look, I mean, if somebody's sole income is social welfare, the deferral limits are 12,000 for a single person and 25 for a couple. And on top of that, there's 80% of the interest paid in the mortgage. There is no social welfare payment that I know of, which is in excess of those figures. So the people on social welfare, where social welfare is their sole income, may defer. Please. And we have done the calculations. If you were to defer for 20 years, and pay the 4% interest rate at simple interest, you would not have paid 5%. You'd be less than 5% of the total value of the house by the time 20 years was up, and whatever transaction would pass the house on to the next generation occurred. So the deferral system is built in, and of course it protects people who cannot pay. But we want to be fair. For too long we have a situation where the burden is spread very heavily on the shoulders of those who pay and who seem to pay for everything. And on this occasion, I don't want a situation, as I said in the Senate, where you have people inside in what used to be a local authority estate, where 70% of them are tenant purchasers, and they all are liable for the property tax, and then 30% are tenants of the local authority, and they're not liable at all. That's not fair. And with present housing policy, and I mean, you're good at your jobs on the ground. I have a fair idea of the work you put in. But if you know what's happening with housing policy in recent years, the local authorities are buying in the private housing estates. Now, how can I introduce a tax where everybody on a mortgage is paying the property tax in the estate, and the person who is the tenant of the local authority is not paying anything? Now, I don't want to be hard. I don't want to be hard on anybody. I don't want to be hard on anybody, and that's why with the local authority charge are the maxima that I referred to. But this is a good and sensible tax, as I think many deputies privately recognise. Deputy Healy-Rae made a number of points. I didn't fully take the point about the people living in houses that had radon gas problems. If you gave me a note on that, I check it out. I check it out for you. I'm not sure what point you're making. Obviously, if a house is impaired, it's like I said about flooding along the Tolka. That was raised by deputies here. If a house is subject to flooding, it's reasonable when you're returning your self-assessment to the Revenue Commissioners to allow for the fact that it's subject to flooding. And it takes the value down. But I disagree with people who say a house is worth nothing. I think it was Deputy Healy-Rae said, if you were awake at night by the neighbour's cows looking in over the wall at you, your house, would impair the value of your house. And it would, of course. And if there's a silage pit in the yard, it impairs the value of the house as well. But to say the house is worth nothing is ridiculous, because I've met no farmer yet who offered to give away his house for me. And a house is an expensive thing to run. And a house is an expensive thing to run. And if it's worth nothing, you'll be meeting them on the road every day and they save a house for you, Mike. Here it is for you. It is only costing me money. So we shouldn't exaggerate the position. Everything has value. And all we're asking is to put a value on it. All we're asking is to put a value on it and You know, obviously, if a residence is seriously impaired by the activity of the householder, whether it's farming or business or anything else, and if that reduces the value, that will be reflected in the self-assessment, and it's up to people to decide what value they attribute to the house, and they'll get guidance from the Revenue Commissioners. Deputy Seamus Healy made a general speech and made a lot of good points. He challenged the constitutionality of the legislation. Now, I think it's generally known by deputies that no minister can introduce legislation unless he receives a stamped copy from the Attorney-General. And the stamp means that, in the opinion of the Attorney-General, the act or the bill is constitutional. So, if anybody wants to challenge the constitutionality, that's what the courts are for. But the Attorney-General has evaluated this, and she says it's constitutional, and I have no doubt whatsoever but that it is constitutional, and Deputy Healy didn't express the reasons why he thought that it might be unconstitutional. Well, he said because of process.
I said it's given Dáil, and it didn't give public representation.
In any case, that was deemed to be unconstitutional, because opposition deputies would have to debate it.
Please have respect for the person in possession.
Now, there are assumptions on behalf of some deputies that adopting a house to enable a disabled person to live there will increase the value. That's not true. In many cases, the adaptation of a house to suit disabled persons will reduce the value, and reduce the value substantially. I mean, again, you're familiar from your constituency work with this, and don't tell me that the changes that have to be made of necessity to suit disabled persons increase the value of houses if you've ever been in a house that has been adapted. And of course that will be reflected in the valuation. And the revenue are reasonable people. The revenue are reasonable people. And I can't see them, pursuing anybody who explains that the value of their house has gone down because it had to be adapted for the use of a disabled person. The last point I'd like to make, people challenge the fact that the Revenue Commissioners were being entrusted with the collection of this tax. I mean, the Revenue Commissioners is the state agency that's responsible for collecting taxes. Who better to collect it? One of the problems of the flat rate taxes were that they were inadequately collected, despite the best efforts of those that were given responsibility. And the Revenue are setting about this in a systematic way. They're giving very, very clear information. And I think, deputies have made some good points, but we have before us a 16-section amendment bill, and if we were dealing with the terms of that, we'd be making more progress than listening to a whole series of second-stage speeches again. Thank you.
Deputy Tom Fleming and Deputy Matthew McGrath had signalled.
Last caller. I support the call by Deputy
And by the way, we're on the definition section now,
yeah.
section 1.
Well, his amendment by Deputy Michael Healy-Rae.
Well, this is an amendment. We'll come to that later.
Fair enough.
We're on section 1, definition.
Well, regarding the whole radon problem in particular in County Kerry, it has had very serious consequences over the past 10 years in particular, and it has claimed a lot of lives, for instance, and it is seriously affecting the general health of people who are unfortunate maybe to be living in these pockets of areas that are affected. And I think time will tell of the overall implications for the general public who have to live in the houses affected by it. And it is a modern phenomenon, more or less, because of the standard of the housing quality at the moment, and the whole insulation of these houses, and with the huge cost of energy as well, and cost of oil for heating houses. Naturally, people have a very high standard of insulation, but the side effects of that is that it traps the radon gas, and people are very unfortunate to be in this situation because, as the Minister has said, perhaps their houses are not worthless, but they're hugely devalued. and that is the whole kernel of the problem here. And I think that there will have to be some mechanism worked out to allow for a huge number of population in County Kerry. There is large pockets of the county, and remedial measures can be carried out, but it's not 100%, and it's very costly as well because of you have to get the ESB current to drive the fans to extract the air. The other matter here regarding this, I think, is it's a very serious disincentive in the whole act here, insofar as the raising the value of properties, for instance, by the implications for the householder is if they need to build their extensions in their family homes, etc. I think this is a huge deterrent. The further rate of valuation on these particular houses, because the reality here is that the construction industry at the moment is down its knees, and I think we shouldn't be putting any impediments there for people to create activity in the building industry, and I do believe that we need a serious relook at this. Every job that's out there at the moment, no matter how small it is priceless with the huge unemployment that we have in the country. And I think that this is a very serious deterrent, I'll be honest about it. The other thing I will say, look, I would have reservations even about the mansion, the raising of high valuation on mansions and a high tax rate on these houses. I'll give an instance. First of all, Michael Flatley, he came into Castle Hyde below in Fermoy, and he certainly deserves to be applauded for what he's done there. It's a huge asset to the area. He's been a boost to the economy there. The amount of work and the amount of builders that have been engaged, I think this is something we should be encouraging. And if we are to get in direct foreign investors, we can't be putting obstacles in their way. For instance, a lot of these are demanding a larger type house because they may have the parent company coming over, or their fellow directors or managers will be coming occasionally, and they want to entertain these people, and they have. And I think that I think it's a ridiculous one. I'll be honest about it, because of the matters that I've outlined there.
Thank you, Deputy McGrath. Matty McGrath.
Les Councillor, I too want to make a few comments on this section of the bill, and indeed the generality of it. And it's fine for Minister Noonan here tonight to be waxing lyrical there about the daughter and about, you know, what opposition TDs have put down, and we all appreciate his good humour. We can go back to Scrap Saturday 20 years ago when he was minister or whatever to know about the humour and the sarcasm, and I respect him what he's trying to do, but I don't respect the way in this bill has been guillotined and the way this bill has been forced through.
Definition section.
60, I know that, 63 amendments and such short time to discuss them. So, Minister, it's extremely unfair, and even the very night that this tax was mooted in the budget, the man, Minister Big Phil, the enforcer, where was he? Out in Doha at some kind of a world conference. That's how little perception of our understanding of the trauma that people are in out there. I mean, you mentioned the houses that were flooded in the Dáil. Yes, certainly. There are hundreds of them in Clonmel and threatened all the time. You can't get insurance. We spent massive money there, I know, but I don't see them being recognised. I don't see the people read on. And while I do welcome the situations regarding that you did look at regarding the voluntary sector, housing sector, and other aspects like that, certainly, but there's room for this bill is draconian, and to give the revenue the kind of power you've given them and to bring them into people's homes, I think is a retrograde step. As I said before in another debate, I'm self-employed. I'm used to dealing with the revenue in my premises because I operate a business from my home. And that's fine. But the vast majority of homeowners who are in negative equity, who are in appalling situations of debt, leading to awful trauma, marriage breakups, all kinds of desperate situations, and indeed many, many suicides, of which you are aware, Minister. And to expect them now to get letters in the post in the next week or two from revenue. Anybody gets a letter from revenue, it's a serious letter, and they regard it as serious. And to be getting it regarding a house tax and self-assessment and evaluation put on the house, they don't know what to expect. They already have so many bills that they can't pay. And now getting this one again, It's certainly, I believe, high-handed, heavy-handed tactics. Your coalition back in the 80s was accused of that in another way. And I think, Minister, and I've said this more than once, that your party, and indeed the Labour Party, are punishing the electorate for having the audacity not to give you a return of government for 14 years. Minister Shatter says it every day of the week. 14 years, he says, 14 years. I mean, I do think that, and the public think that too, that you were so long held in the wilderness, some of you that are approaching pension age, are so, we'll teach them a lesson. We saw it in the front page of the paper where the Minister, as I said, big filled-in force is going to teach the media a lesson.
Minister, use the word.
Minister, yeah, of course, I always call him Minister. He's Minister. Minister for Environment, and the man had his property, but he doesn't know how, while we were discussing it here in the budget. That's how he cared about the ordinary people and the homeowners that are in a perilous situation. And the Taoiseach didn't help this morning. When Deputy Barrett was trying to raise it, he scoffed at him and laughed and joked and sneered about standing in some field looking at a house in the distance with tinted glasses or something. I don't know what he was talking about. He needs to get back to reality quite fast, because I think him and some of his ministers, and not all of them, are on an ego trip. Their adrenaline is still up since this time 2 years, and they got in. But they need to face reality, or they'll find out. And I hate mentioning tonight when the by-election is coming after the late deputy in Meath, our friend Shane McEntee. They'll get it in their answers if these letters arrive before the leaflets for the canvassing. But I suppose they won't arrive. Maybe that'll be organised. There'll be a phone call to the revenue to pull off and back. We're the enforcers now. We're in charge here. The little people don't matter to us anymore. It's the people up the tree-lined avenues and the daffodils growing in the high trees that you're interested in. The mansions. I know that my colleague Deputy Fleming mentioned Michael Flatley. He's nimble-footed and a good little dancer. You'll be dancing around the public when you meet him because they're waiting for you. They're waiting for you, Minister. And I hope you're good dancers. I hope you're good runners, because you will be getting it. Because I'm not saying this for fun. I'm saying that people are in a perilous situation. Perilous situation. I was down in Wexford last night in the home village of your chief whip, and by hell, they can't find him because he's too busy in Dublin every day. He tells them, but don't worry, they'll find him because he'll be coming knocking on the doors again, and the property tax will be meeting you in the face, and you won't be Angashori, Torquinticon, oh Mary, how are you doing, how's things? You'll get your answer, because you were never otherwise, Minister, your own party. Only treat the ordinary people with disdain. Goes back to the time of the different coloured shirts. I won't mention them, but you know what I'm talking about. Goes back to that, and you haven't changed your spots. And it's a pity, because, I mean, people are making an effort here to try and talk our way out of work our way out of problems, and are willing to pay, and want to pay. But they can't take this. You want to drive them into penury completely. You have the revenue after them, you have the banks after them, you have the sheriffs after them, you have illegal bandits going around the country recovering debts for banks who are not subject to any Garda clearance assessment. If you want to work in a creche or if you want to work in a forest scheme, sweep the road, you have to have Garda clearance.
You're moving away from
and these people, we are certainly moving away from. I'm very sorry. I want to beg your indulgence a small bit, but I mean the Taoiseach didn't help today, certainly, and it's a pity. It's a pity. It's more on a true way. It's a pity when the public are watching here through the airwaves to see a line of ministers scoffing and laughing at this.
Thank you.
But the scoff will be done outside of your face very soon, and I know that. And you get the first taste of it when you head to the plains of Meath.
Yeah. Deputy Wallace.
I put my hand up when I thought we'd actually move on to the amendments, so I'll just put my name down for the amendments then when you start talking to them.
Deputy Doherty, did you indicate, Deputy? Yeah. On section 1.
On section 1, just briefly on just to query from the Minister. Minister, like section 1, just to deal with this before we move on. You know, you talk about it's local, it's going to provide for local services. You give the impression, Minister, that this is additional money. Like those of us who follow and have to follow as spokespersons on finance know that this is not additional money that's been brought in. That this isn't additional money to local authorities. That local authorities money will be taken from local authorities, and this will be a new stream of funding that will replace money that they already had. But can I ask you in relation to the issue of you mentioned about local authority housing and everybody has to pay their fair share, and you believe it's not fair that somebody in a local authority house doesn't pay their fair share, although, and you should know this, the bill doesn't actually put a charge on a local authority housing tenant. It only puts the charge on the local authority. Now, I assume that your assumption that you're making is that that charge will be passed on to local authority tenants, despite the fact that they do not own the home and they pay rent for the home that they're in. But can I ask you this question? You may or may not be aware of it, but there have been a number of local authorities. There's a number of local authorities that have passed resolutions at local authority level, which are called Section 140, and you'll know this from your time in local authority in Limerick yourself, which where